All right, good evening, gentlemen. It's going to be our Thursday nightly lesson. It's going to introduce the third kind of strand we're going to be looking at, doing writing, introduce reading. Now I'm going to introduce what we're going to be doing Fridays, which is taking a look at the English language. One thing I want to note up top, I heard you when you said that these recordings were getting too long, so don't, showing you responding to that feedback. This original video was called 6 Things to Hate and Love About the English Language. It was almost an hour, and I realized that's too long. So I've cut it down. I'm only going to talk about 2 things to hate and love about the English language. I'm cutting it down, trying to make this 25 minutes, all right? Housekeeping up front. Submit 11th grade essays by Friday, 9:15. So if you do have essays from last year, submit those to me. Some of you already have gotten that in. Outstanding homework assignments. If you missed any of these videos, you have a chance tonight to watch those videos, to make them up, and hand those in tomorrow if you want credit for it this week. All right. All right, so this language unit, what we're going to be talking about is the English language. The goal of this unit is to think about English like a linguist. Linguistics, and this is important, linguistics is the study of language. So just like in biology, biology is the study of life, chemistry is the study of substance or matter, physics is the study of energy, linguistics is the study of language. And what I want to empower you to do is to be able to think about language like a linguist thinks about language. Part of the reason of that is it's going to give you a better framework for some of the reading, writing topics we talk about. But I also want you to be able to counter kind of a lot of prejudices and nonsense and myths that people have about language so that you can be more informed about how language works, where it comes from. You're going to see that once we get into it. Specific skills you're going to have. By the end of this unit, you're going to learn how to look at language linguistically and comparatively. You're going to learn some key facts and concepts about the origin, history, etymologies, and varieties of English. You're going to talk about and you're going to learn the value and parity of different varieties and codes of English. What I mean by that is instead of thinking of English as either something you have or do not have, or having good English or bad English, I want you to think like a linguist and realize that there's a lot of different ways of using English and that all of those are equal. That's what parity means, equal. That there's an equality of all the different ways of talking English, even if there are certain kinds of English that we kind of focus on in school. All right, so like I said, this original lesson was going to be 6 things to hate and love about the English language, and that it's intended to kind of give you an overview of what we're talking about. I'm just going to focus on 2 things, and we'll come back to the other things in future lessons, right? So I called this 6 reasons to hate and love the English language because first and foremost, I want to kind of point out to you ways that English is not a perfect language, that English has a lot to dislike about it. And if you have been frustrated with English in the past, if you found it to be a struggle, I want to kind of make you feel less crazy by saying there's actually some flaws in the English language itself. But then obviously I'm an English teacher, so I want to counter those with some reasons to love the English language. So let's start with number 1 reason to hate the English language. All right? Number 1 reason to hate the English language. The English language, in its history and how it works in the world today, it's kind of like a virus, right? The English language starts off as just a kind of very small, isolated language spoke by a bunch of tribes people in northern Germany that look something like this, right? And somehow it came to take over the entire world. So this map shows you all the places in the world where there are English speakers. Green is where 90-100% of the population speaks English. Yellow is at least 50% speaks English. And you can only see the red areas you see are the only areas where 0 to 5% of the speakers speak English. So English has somehow taken over the entire world. And the reason it kind of works like a virus is English becoming the dominant language in the world has pushed out a lot of other languages. So just like there's endangered species and species that are on the verge of going extinct, languages work the same way. English is a language that takes over new ecosystems and kind of pushes out the languages that are there. So there's only 7,000 languages in the world, English is the most spoken with around 1,500,000,000 speakers. 400 languages account for 95% of the world's populations, and the remainder languages are only spoken by 5% of people. So I would blame English. That's what I mean by English works like a virus. It kind of comes and it kind of wipes out all the varieties of English that were spoken there. Biggest problem with English too is if you look at its history, these random northern Germanic tribes people, they weren't particularly brilliant. They weren't inventing things like algebra in the Middle East or things like bombs and chess and paper and gunpowder in China. They didn't really have much going for them except they're really good at taking people over, right? So the history of English is kind of the history of just that. It's nothing about English itself that is so powerful that people just choose to speak it. It's just English-speaking peoples, who tend to be Northern European peoples, go and take over other places, and that is basically, in a nutshell, how English spreads. So what to really hate about English, if you look at the main things that caused English to spread: conquest, where a country just takes over another land; colonialism, that's where European countries go to other places in the world, decide they're not really places at all, and basically take them over as colonies; imperialism, that's when those non-European countries decide they are countries, but Europe doesn't care and takes them over anyways; or capitalism, right? That's where you no longer need nations to take over the world. Businesses and corporations can do that work for them. So if you look at how English spread, it's really this. It's people taking over land that's not theirs, wiping out the languages that are there, and kind of insisting that English become the dominant one, right? So that's why English is kind of like a virus. It doesn't spread because it's brilliant. It spreads because it's just good at taking over things and spreading, right? So in that way, you kind of think about the world. English is kind of like a zombie phenomenon, right? Where just whether they like it or not, more and more people every single day speak more and more English, right? So that's what I mean when I say the number one reason to hate English is it's like a virus. All right, now on the flip side of that is a second reason, which is a reason to love English, right? That same phenomenon that caused English to become everywhere in the world means that English is now the number one world lingua franca, which means common tongue, or a language that people have in common. Lingua franca, common tongue, language people have in common. So how that works is like this, right? Say you have a business meeting somewhere over in Asia, right? And at the business meeting, there's going to be can't get this to work. Right, okay, so if you have a business meeting and you have a Chinese businessman, Japanese businessman, Indian businessman, they all speak different languages. You might not know about those three cultures, but they've frequently been in conflict for many of their histories. So it's unlikely that either of them, the Chinese businessman learned Japanese, or that the Japanese businessman learned Indian, right? So what do those three businessmen speak? They speak English, right? Not because any of those guys love English or have an English background, but because it's the lingua franca, the common tongue, that allows those three different language groups to come together and talk, right? A local example of this is a map of the Bronx, of all the different languages besides English and besides Spanish that are spoken in the Bronx, right? So you see how many different languages are right here. Bronx is the most diverse linguistic place in the world, meaning that not in the world, in America, meaning that it's the place in America where there's the highest percentage that two people just sitting next to each other on the bus speak different languages, right? So you can think about the Bronx, right? If we did not have English or maybe Spanish as lingua franca, common tongue, right? None of these different communities, neighbors could do business with each other, talk to each other, work things out, even like insult each other, but right? So lingua franca, common tongue means that everybody can be both speaking different languages and communicate with each other, right? So benefits of English being a global language means people from all around the world can communicate, right? So in most places in the world, if you know English, you can probably find someone who can speak English. News, information, and entertainment goes to a larger population, right? So you can get things out, and when you have a tongue in common. And I think the second thing is, even if most of the history of English is people being forced to speak English, or English kind of coming and arriving with the conquest of lands and people, today you could also think about English as a tool. So for instance, there's more people learning English right now in China than there are people learning English right now in America, right? And they're learning English not because anyone's making them, but because they see it as a powerful tool for getting ahead in the world, right? So you can think about English now as a global language that has advantages because it is spoken all over the world, all right? Anyways, so like I said, I'm going to save the rest of the reasons for future videos. What I want you to do, we're also going to modify homework a little bit. All right, so homework tonight. I originally had you writing down a list of 6 things you love and hate about English. Just give me 2. Give me 2 things you love and hate about the English language. You can base it on some of the reasons we talked about in the lesson, but try to connect it with your own experience as an English speaker, right? So in other words, think about this main question we looked at tonight. English as this kind of virus, this kind of ugly mark that of how European people took over the world. Or think about it as this thing that allows all the different kinds of people and all the different kinds of languages in the world to connect with each other, for people to talk. Anyways, think about one reason you love English based on your own experiences as an English speaker, and then one reason to hate English based on your experiences as an English speaker. Try and use about 2 or 3 full sentences so we get a really idea of what you're talking about. Class hotline tonight. So again, after you kind of written down those 2 reasons, call in so we can start the class with your thoughts. Class hotline is 1-413-308-2876. Up tonight is Tyreek, Jaden Davis, Gabriel, Nazir, Daniel, and Isaiah Watkins. So if that was your name, once you've thought of one reason you hate English, one reason you love English, call on the hotline, share it, and we will start tomorrow's class with your voices. All right, that's it. Got it in just like at 12 minutes long. So again, I'm a responsive teacher. I heard you guys complain. Got a 12-minute long video. No reason not to do it. I'll see you tomorrow in class.